Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't crash into your life. It waits. It waits until the moment is over, until there's nothing left to change, until the door's already closed. Then it speaks. Psychologically, regret is not a single emotion. It's a mental process, a loop. Your brain looks backward, imagines an alternative future, and compares it to what exists now. And in that comparison, regret is born. This is why regret feels so vivid. Your mind is not remembering reality. It's constructing loss. Neuroscience shows that the brain does not clearly separate imagination from experience. When you replay a moment you wish you'd handled differently, the same emotional centers activate as if the event were happening again. Your body reacts. Your chest tightens. Your stomach sinks. Not because something is happening now, but because your brain believes it is. This makes regret uniquely cruel. Failure happens once. Regret happens repeatedly. Failure is concrete. Regret is hypothetical. And hypothetical pain has no limits. You can imagine 1,000 better outcomes, and your brain will punish you for every single one. This is why people often say they regret not trying more than failing. Because failure ends the story. Inaction keeps it alive. Psychologists call this the inaction effect. When you act and fail, your brain eventually adapts. When you don't act, your brain refuses closure. What if becomes louder than what was? And the longer time passes, the more idealized that imagined future becomes. Your mind edits out the risks. It removes the uncertainty. It turns the alternative into perfection, and then compares it to your imperfect reality. This comparison is where regret sharpens. But regret doesn't come from every decision. It attaches itself to moments that threaten your identity. Moments that ask, who are you going to be? The job you didn't take. The person you didn't tell the truth to. The moment you stayed silent instead of choosing yourself. These aren't just choices. They are identity forks. And when you look back at them, you're not only judging the decision, you're judging the person you were. This is where regret becomes heavy, because now it's no longer, I wish I had done something different. It becomes, I wish I were different. And that thought cuts deeper. Psychologically, the brain links regret to self-concept. When a decision contradicts who you believe you could have been, regret intensifies. You don't just feel loss, you feel distance. Distance between who you are and who you imagine you might have become. This is why regret often resurfaces in quiet moments. At night, in stillness, when there's nothing left to distract the mind. Your brain doesn't replay random memories. It replays unresolved ones. Regret is the mind's way of saying, this story never finished. And the more emotionally significant the decision, the louder the replay becomes. Love decisions create the deepest regret, not because love is fragile, but because love ties directly to meaning. You don't regret loving the wrong person. You regret becoming someone smaller to keep them. You don't regret leaving. You regret staying silent for too long. And over time, regret shifts. At first, it hurts. Later, it reshapes behavior. But before it does that, it changes how you see your past. Your mind stops remembering context. It forgets fear. It forgets uncertainty. It forgets how little you knew then. It only remembers the outcome. This creates a dangerous illusion that the right choice was obvious. It wasn't. Every decision you regret today was once made with limited information, limited energy, and limited emotional capacity. But your brain judges the past with present knowledge. This is a cognitive distortion. Yet it feels logical, and that's why regret is so convincing. It sounds reasonable. It feels justified. It whispers, you should have known better. But knowing better now does not mean you could have known better then. This misunderstanding is what allows regret to turn into self-punishment, and once regret becomes punishment, It no longer teaches. It only wounds. Regret does not stay in the past. It moves forward with you, quietly. Psychologically, unresolved regret doesn't just replay memories, it rewires behavior. The brain learns one lesson above all others. Don't let this happen again. But it learns it the wrong way. Instead of becoming wiser, many people become smaller, more cautious, more hesitant, less alive. This is where regret stops being an emotion and becomes a strategy. Psychologists call this regret avoidance. It's when future decisions are no longer about growth, meaning, or alignment, but about avoiding the pain of looking back again. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What hurts least?" This is how regret quietly reshapes lives. People turn down opportunities not because they're wrong, but because they feel risky. They stay in relationships that no longer fit, not because they're happy, but because leaving might create another memory to regret. They choose safety not because it's fulfilling, but because it feels controllable. Regret teaches the brain that loss is unbearable, so the brain avoids situations where loss is possible. Ironically, this creates the exact conditions that produce more regret, because the same mind that punishes inaction in the past also punishes avoidance in the present. This creates a loop: regret, avoidance, stagnation, more regret. Another psychological effect of regret is something called counterfactual dominance. This happens when imagined alternatives start to feel more real than your actual life. The career you almost pursued, the person you almost became, the version of yourself that exists only in hindsight. These imagined versions are flawless. They never get tired. They never make mistakes. They always choose correctly. And no real human life can compete with that. So the present begins to feel disappointing by comparison. This is why regret often intensifies with age. Not because people make more mistakes, but because options begin to close. When time feels abundant, the brain says, "There's still a chance." When time feels limited, the brain says, "That was your chance." This shift makes regret heavier, more final, more personal. But here is a truth rarely explained. Not all regret is destructive. There is functional regret and toxic regret. Functional regret informs behavior. It says, "This didn't align with my values. This boundary matters. This is what I won't ignore again." Toxic regret attacks identity. It says, "You always mess things up. This proves who you are. You can't be trusted with decisions." The difference is not intelligence, it's interpretation. People who heal from regret separate the decision from the self. They understand that a choice can be wrong without the person being broken. I made a decision with the information I had as grounding. I ruined everything is paralyzing. The brain, however, prefers the second explanation because self-blame creates the illusion of control. If it's your fault, then next time you can prevent it. This feels safer than admitting uncertainty, but it's also inaccurate. Every decision exists inside context: fear, pressure, limited energy, incomplete information. Judging your past self with your present awareness is a cognitive distortion, yet almost everyone does it. And that's why regret feels so logical. It sounds reasonable. It feels earned. It disguises itself as wisdom. But wisdom does not punish endlessly. Wisdom integrates. The final psychological truth about regret is this: your brain will always create alternative timelines. You cannot stop that. What you can decide is whether those timelines become teachers or tormentors. Regret is not proof that you failed. It is proof that you cared. And caring always comes with risk. The goal is not to erase regret. The goal is to stop letting it define you. Because when regret becomes identity, the future never gets a fair chance. And the greatest tragedy of regret is not what it reminds you of. It's what it convinces you to avoid.